Hello, my name is Gerik Maverick, and this is the Hell Yeah Brother podcast. This is our official campaign podcast where we interview experts, advocates, and politicians to talk about the issues that are affecting the 37th House District. Today, I'm so very excited. We're going to be joined by Representative Joey Andrews, the representative for the 38th House District, just to our west. He has the coastline district all the way from New Buffalo to Saugatuck, and he is a great representative for the state of Michigan. He does a lot of really impactful work in our community. He is somebody who I have confided in many, many times, somebody who I really appreciate attending his events and getting to see his insights into what's happening in Lansing. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today. For those who don't know, the state house, led by the Republican Party, has passed a massive budget. And there are some really, really, really difficult and damaging parts of this budget. Things that are going to affect working people, everyday Michiganders, things that are just going to make people's lives worse. And so we are going to dive into that in this podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about the state of our state. For those who don't know, it's been a busy weekend. It is Labor Day when we're filming this. Just a couple days ago, we had a educational meeting an hour before our current 37th House District Representative Brad Paquette had his town hall. For an hour before that meeting, we trained community members on how to engage in those meetings. We gave them a lot of great data on this budget that just came out, which we're going to talk about here. And we were able to tell them a little bit about how Brad engages in these meetings, some of the tricks he uses to deflect, and really prepare them for how to engage in those meetings and really have a little bit more understanding of what a state representative's job is in the first place. So that was incredibly exciting. We had our coffee hour in Buchanan. For those as of not recording, but when this comes out, we're going to be doing our Saturday in the Dog Park event. You're going to get to meet our campaign dog, Bernie, who you may hear in the background of this podcast. We're going to be doing that at 1 p.m. at Rough and Tumble in Niles. We're excited to meet you. We're excited to hang out with you and your four-legged friends. And we're excited to get to talk a little bit more about the 37th House District. That all being said, let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with Representative Joey Andrews.
Yeah, so I represent the 38th House District, which to do the Michigan thing is the coastline right about here. Saugatuck all the way down to New Buffalo. I live in the St. Joseph, Benton Harbor area, kind of right at the middle of the district. Moved here when I was about 12 years old, 13 years old from the Dowagiac Sister Lakes area. Pretty much lived here my whole life, aside from college and grad school. Graduated from Wayne State University with a law degree in 2013. Possibly the worst time in the history of the world to become a lawyer at the depth of the recession. So went into small business for a little bit. I owned a solar installation company for a few years, as well as doing work with my family's businesses in the wake of the recession. Ran in 2018 for an old gerrymandered version of the seat here. Did okay, but lost, which is pretty much the only thing that actually matters. And then went to work for the Biden campaign in 2020 and the Michigan AFL-CIO after that, before running for the new version of the seat that was drawn in 2021 and winning that time during the 22 election in my second term. And it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, and you've been of the local voices, especially somebody who's been able to provide a lot of insight into what's happening in Lansing. I've been to a bunch of your town halls, as you know. I think folks, again, looking at the landscape of town halls that are happening in our community, we had Wahlberg here on Wednesday, Paquette a couple days ago on Saturday. You, I think, are the gold standard for how these things should operate. Community members causing trouble aside, I think, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but your approach to answering questions, and I think it speaks to the positions you're coming from, where you don't have to obfuscate very much. It seems more informative. Can you tell a little bit about how you view these town halls, especially in this moment where folks are really calling out for that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had the belief that, people are coming to these things because they want information. And I think, some people have the idea that, if you give people too much information, it overwhelms them. But I'm like, I don't know. I think, you answer people's questions as directly as possible. And, you've been to a few of mine. I try to make mine as much Q&A as possible.
Yeah.
My goal is to not spend more than 15 or 20 minutes doing the, here's what's going on in Lansing piece. And spend most of the time just dialoguing and answering questions. And I like to hope that everybody walks out more informed I don't expect everybody to like my answers necessarily. I hope they do, but I don't expect them to. But at least I hope they walk out understanding like the process and like, the dialogue more, and they don't just, they're not just getting one side of this whole thing from me every single time.
Yeah, no, and I think, again, one of the big topics of discussion for the last several months since the beginning of summer, really, has been the state budget. There's a lot of nothing for almost 2 months, and then a whole lot of something just happened. Do you want to give folks a little bit of insight? I know you've talked a little bit about some of the wheeling and dealing that has been attempted and failed throughout the summer, and then, again, kind of this last minute, handing it off to you an hour before you got to vote on it type of bill that popped out.
Yeah, so I guess for those that don't know, back in 2019, the legislature set a deadline for itself of July 1st to have a budget done every year. And the reason for that is because schools and local governments start their budgeting in the last half of the year. And as you can imagine, it's very hard for a school to figure out what its budget's going to be if they don't know what the state is going to do. So the first 2 years that I was there during the Democratic trifecta, we had our budget done by July 1st each time. All that to say, it is possible to have a budget done by the deadline. This year in divided government, the House Republicans had not even presented shell bills for most of the budget by the deadline. And for people that don't know that terminology, basically each chamber passes a set of bills that aren't like wholly complete with the expectation that there's going to be negotiations. And those are sort of often referred to as shell bills because they're going to get modified. And so you expect those to be done by April so that we can have 2 months of negotiations leading up to getting the budget done. This year, those weren't even completed by July 1. Some education bills were put out ahead of July 1st, but they were not serious bills. I don't know how else to put it. They just weren't serious budget bills. So we had nothing to work with at July 1st. And then all summer long, there was, a few attempts here and there to try and get something done. Even on July 1st, there was an attempt at trying to negotiate some House bills that would get road funding done as long as we could get, the education budget done. That failed. And the speaker basically spent his summer trying to accuse the Senate, who had, by the way, passed a budget, of being the problem. I think that finally, he realized that wasn't a tenable path. And so last week, the House Republicans, with zero notice, we walked in thinking that we were going to be voting on like 4 or 5 different bills. And we got on the floor and we got a message from our floor leader saying, we're voting on the budget today. There's going to be a caucus in 15 minutes. Jeez. So we all go back into the, So we all go back into the room, and moral of the story is they gave us 1 hour before the vote to review the budget. They wouldn't allow the House Fiscal Agency, which is the nonpartisan House staff whose job is to tell us like what the economic impact of the budget is going to be. They wouldn't let them give us the analysis before the vote. So basically, they made sure we were going in without having read the budget and without understanding any of the economic impact. So for, basically 45 minutes, because that's, after we got done talking, that's about how long we had to review it. We all kind of scrambled to break this thing up into pieces. And it became obvious really quickly this was a horrible budget. Like, they were cutting, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. My guess is just because they wanted to have a big number of cuts to message on, and all over the map on the cuts, like VA stuff. There's $100 million from the state police, which, for the party of public safety is
defunding the police.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I will note that both years I was there, we increased public safety funding, and the Republicans get power back, and the first thing they do is slash $100 million from the state police.
Well, what was more insidious about that specific item is, from what I read, they had removed a lot of the training requirements as well. So for de-escalation, recognizing diversity, equity, all the woke DEI stuff that we definitely don't want our police learning. Which I think is even more insidious because it's both defunding the police and also not doing what the defund the police movement is all about, which is police reform. And it's making the police worse and also defunded.
Yeah, and I mean, to cut training requirements is insane to me. Like, if there's one thing that I think everybody agrees on, it's that, like, you want more police training, better
certainly
police
de-escalation
training.
Is certainly something like your inherent biases that you may need to confront as somebody with the power of literally being the armed arm of the state. it might be good
Yeah.
to recognize, hey, maybe I may have some internal things I need to work through, and then also
And
like,
they
hey,
went
maybe
after
I need to know how to calm a situation down. Uh, Again, pretty
well,
baseline stuff.
they went after CVI funding, which is the like violent, basically like the intervention funding to go to stop violent crime from happening before it happens. And so it's like you're going after the stuff that like prevents violent crime on the front end, and then reducing training requirements. So it's like if you were trying to like make policing harder and worse, this is
Yeah.
pretty much what you would do.
Yeah, no, and again, it's I think the obstructionist nature of the Republican Party is something that we again has been a decades long narrative, certainly within our national government, but I think our state government is certainly copying those tactics and those trends. I think it's important to note we're recording this on Labor Day, and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity got cut by almost half, a
Yes.
$1.13 billion cut. And
Yeah.
then also the Department of Civil Rights got cut nearly in half. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about the ramifications of those kinds of cuts. I mean, things I'm reading, not good, not good at all. I
No.
mean, again, caseloads are already tough, especially for the Department of Civil Rights. Again, that's workforce protections. That's everything protections in terms of your government services. All these very important things, and also cultural importance. The Holocaust Museum, I believe, was going to be part of that defunding. Several museums, several things of that sort. Tell us a little bit about those cuts and how they're going to impact Michiganders.
Yeah, I mean, these are an insane degree of cuts here. Like, yeah, they defunded the Holocaust Museum, the African American History Museum. These are like cultural cornerstones that I don't think anybody finds controversial. Of course, all the civil rights stuff is because they're on this like anti DEI thing right now,
Mm-hmm.
and they've decided that DEI just means like diversity and social justice broadly. Like anything that talks about non-white people is just like oh boy, we're going after it. Um, but they some things they snuck in that I thought were particularly insidious is in the attorney general's funding, they put a line in there which we're all
Mm.
pretty sure is unconstitutional that says that no funding from the legislature can be used by the attorney general's office to litigate against the federal government. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so literally tying the hands of the attorney general, like on its one of its primary purposes, which is like fighting for the state of Michigan in
Yeah,
federal court.
and they cut her office by I think it was what $38 million as well, which is
Oh yeah,
again just
just
cutting things that are holding up law in our in our state and protecting especially marginalized folks right now.
right, and largely because she's been going after Donald Trump and like all the illegal stuff the federal government's doing. So instead of reckoning with the illegalities, just don't litigate it anymore. Apparently,
Yeah.
um, within the Leo budget, they made cuts to a couple of programs that have been really successful in Southwest Michigan too. Going Pro is a program that helps like train workforce into professional like blue collar jobs. So like if you wanted to go get a new job, say you wanted to get into like HVAC, right? You've never done HVAC before. I've never done HVAC before, but that's what you want to do. Going Pro is a fund that allows like Connexus, Michigan Works, like some of these agencies, the ability to like take you and train you in doing HVAC, and the state pays for it so that you can get that skill set. And Southwest Michigan is a pretty low certification region of the state.
Mm-hmm.
We have a relatively unskilled workforce here compared to the rest of the state, and so it's been a huge program locally. And on top of that, they zeroed out the JMG funding, which
Mm-hmm.
you might be familiar with from your partner's work. But JMG basically takes kids in high school that are low odds to graduate and puts them into like trades programs and career training programs, helps them through graduation, and gets them plugged in directly with jobs post graduation. Massively successful program across our region. So like, and like, for what reason you would cut programs like that when we're in such a workforce crisis? You know?
Yeah, no, and I think kind of going right over to those education cuts, which again, the big two narratives I've heard from this bill are not either of those things. They are road funding, which we'll get to, and healthcare being an almost $9 billion cut to several services. But I think the school funding is particularly, I think, interesting because they kept the funding for most of these programs. They just removed the earmarks.
Yep.
At least that's my understanding of this. And so it's you get the funds for free school lunch, you get the funds for some of these programs, but no obligation to actually deliver these things to your students. No obligation. And I think, when you look at school districts that are struggling, which several are, I mean, you're in a situation where folks are going to have to make decisions about paying faculty, paying administrators, upkeep on buildings, all these things that are becoming harder and harder for a lot of school districts to do. You see school districts downsizing, closing buildings, making them choose between feeding their kids and keeping up on their facilities is just, it doesn't seem to be actually addressing any problems and only delivering a mechanism for some students to receive unfair treatment and harm, frankly, from these kinds of cuts.
Yeah, and it's even worse too, because the way the categoricals function is school districts have to qualify for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did is what I'm pretty sure they wanted to do is they wanted to show a big per pupil increase.
Yeah,
and
which
so
they are
the only
bragging
way
about. Sorry.
Exactly. You're right, though, and the only way you can do that without raising revenue or something like that, which they're never going to do, is you have to start bucketing the categorical money into the per pupil. So then they put out their budget and they say we're giving a record increase to per pupil funding. Well, the problem is if you're an at-risk school district, like let's say Benton Harbor in my area, in my district, Benton Harbor is losing student enrollment year over year. So you can increase per pupil funding as much as you want, but it's a race to the bottom as you're trying to increase this per pupil funding, where the categoricals are huge for them because they have an at-risk population. They have a low third grade reading rate. They have all this stuff that helps them qualify for assistance for meals and reading and mental health support, all this stuff that the population needs. And then on the other side of that coin, you have school districts like New Buffalo and Saugatuck, for instance, that are out of formula. Because their property taxes or revenue is so high. So they don't receive the per pupil the same way, which means they rely on the categoricals to fund this stuff because they're out of formula. So they've somehow managed to do something that hurts both the most at risk and least at risk school districts at the same time, which is fascinating. Honestly, they figured out how to do that.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan is spinning in his grave thinking, man, I could have done so much more. I could have somehow stratified both sides of it and made it even worse.
And they effectively unified the superintendents, the school boards, and the teachers union, which never happens. All three of those groups came together and were like, this budget sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think, again, going back to the, the big, elephant pun, pardon the pun there, in the room, is the almost $9 billion in cuts to Health and Human Services, Medicaid, and behavioral health programs. We were at Brad Paquette's town hall on Saturday, and he was confronted with this question several times, and his answer to this was to say there are no cuts. There are no cuts to Medicaid. There are no cuts to Health and Human Services. These are just changing the parameters in which folks qualify for these programs who shouldn't qualify. And we really got tied up in language of determining if someone's able to work, the able to work thing that they added to this. And again, it's one of those things that when you start to think through, how is our government going to verify who's able to work? How are we going to actually do this, especially in an age where folks can work from home in some jobs? And now, again, they also target that in this bill, which I think is telling as well. But I think, tell us a little bit about, again, and we may not have a full scope of how these things are going to come down, but we're talking, in the community of Dowagiac, which I live, our hospital was already under threat from the big, beautiful bill tax cuts. The hospital system said they're going to keep the hospital open, thank goodness. But these are more cuts, and, that's not a guarantee forever that it's going to stay open. That's a guarantee that right now their current plans are to keep it open. But under this kind of pressure, I can't imagine our system having that kind of strength right now and that resilience right now to these kind of cuts.
Well, and again, kind of same story with the school budget. The fact that you have the hospital association, the insurance association, and healthcare workers all coming together and saying this budget is bad for us, that never happens. Usually if it's bad for nurses, then the hospital association's like, yeah, we love this. If it's good for insurance, then, there's usually one leg of the stool is happy if the other two are unhappy. Mm-hmm. And they crafted a budget here that, the hospital association came out immediately and said, look, we're already looking at having to close rural hospitals, this makes this worse. Like it just makes it 10 times worse. The Medicaid cuts that they put into the budget, Medicaid kind of like underpins our whole healthcare system. Yeah. So the more you undermine Medicaid, the harder you make it for hospitals and insurance companies to operate. And the thing that they're both going to do is they're going to pass that on to ordinary people, right? Like everybody's premiums and deductibles are going to go up. The cost of care is going to go up. And at the end of the day, that all that burden falls on workers who can't afford to have their insurance premiums go up. And the work requirements are just the thing about the work requirements that really drives me crazy is it's one of those talking points that sounds really good to ordinary people when you're like, oh, if you can work, you need to work, and everyone's like, yeah, of course, we need to get like lazy people off the system. But the reality is half of the people on Medicaid are children. So children don't work. That's at
least in Michigan currently.
Yeah. I mean, there's some states experimenting with going back to the Upton Sinclair stuff, but children don't work. Like another quarter are disabled and not able to work, or at least not able to work in a traditional sense. Another 10 or 15% are elderly. And so once you get done going through like retirees, the disabled, children, there's like 10% of people left on Medicaid at that point. And okay, maybe 2 or 3% could be working in RN. Sure. Maybe,
especially in a climate where unemployment is not particularly high. I mean, underemployment certainly is, but in terms of the unemployment numbers are not abysmal. Like when we're not dealing with a population that isn't working, we're dealing with a population that isn't making enough money.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, we've been at the closest to full employment you could be for the last 3 or 4 years since COVID. The unemployment rate in Michigan is a tad higher than the national average, but you're talking about 4% versus 3%. I don't know who
explains all these phantom jobs that are haunting us in our state budgets. These phantoms that are coming out of the darkness and scaring our children.
Yeah, phantom jobs. That's their new thing this year. That the state agencies have fake jobs apparently.
Yeah, and that's where the police cuts are coming from. They say these are not going to be real people jobs. These are cutting jobs. Like again, we were at this town hall and the excuse, and again, I assume it's the excuse of the party line because I don't think he's particularly good at creating policy or ideas. I'll say that very generously. I think, listening to the way that they're trying to talk and spin this is like, oh, well, these are job listings that aren't being filled, and so we're removing that funding, and then if the agencies need to hire, they can always come to us and ask for more funds, and that's just not how budgets work from what I understand. And it's also, again, I try to live by this, a few adages, but one that I think is particularly important here is you don't tear down a fence without knowing why it was put up. And the strategy that he is, and again, I've seen Republicans try to taunt, is like, oh, we are tearing down all these walls and people can come to us, like what they're doing, like the whole Trump thing. Oh, they'll come to us and make these deals to get their funding back. And I think it's just, again, it's bad faith because I don't believe they have any intention of bringing any of this funding back, obviously. But I think it's also makes them look really bad at this. I think to anybody who's even a little bit informed in some of these processes, it's like, wait a minute, you're cutting everything to bring it back? Aren't you supposed to be overseeing this to begin with?
Well, and the thing is look, the state agencies need work. I think any human who's paying attention knows that there is inefficiencies, there are problems at our state agencies, but they are also grossly understaffed and underfunded. And a lot of the inefficiency that we see comes in part from the fact that they're underfunded. These are not phantom jobs. They are unfilled positions. That is what this is. And I think if you talk to any business owner and you're like, oh, well, instead of hiring those other 2 people you need on the floor, what if you just cut the positions? Nobody's creating, I know there's this notion that the government's just writing checks a drunk sailor or something. But the reality is that these positions exist because there are jobs that need to be done. And right now, nobody is working those jobs. In part because we're in a state of full employment and there just aren't a lot of people looking for these kinds of government jobs right now. So to cut the funding for those jobs makes those jobs not exist anymore. And it, like you said, it is very hard to get more funding for those positions. They call them FTEs in the budget, full-time equivalents.
Mm.
And basically, whenever we fund a program, usually the agency will come to us and say, okay, in order to administer this, we need like 3 or 4 people. And so they'll ask for 4 full-time equivalents that they can pay to administer a program. Now, if 2 of those don't get filled for whatever reason, that doesn't mean they don't need those 2 people necessarily. It just means that they haven't been able to find a qualified person or nobody's applied for it. So if you cut those out of the mix, then you're having a program being held up by too few people. And at some point, the agency is going to come back and say, well, we need, 2, 3, 4 more people. And then the legislature is just going to be like, yeah, sure, whatever, take the money. That's a real push and pull.
And again, I think it comes back down to this: if you don't believe in government, if you don't believe in the responsibility of government to deliver for its people, then you view these things as like, okay, yeah, we're gonna continually make these processes worse so that people get bitter towards these processes. And then when they're bitter towards these processes, we're going to tell them, look how bad our government is at doing things. Isn't it so silly that we're giving all this money to the government and they're not delivering? But it's like you're intentionally putting your hand on the scale to make it not deliver. Not you, obviously, the folks passing this budget. And I think, again, people don't always see that. The narrative, like the government is inefficient, the government isn't working, the government doesn't work for you, is very, very popular among people across the aisle, across the spectrum of politics. But so much of that is born out of a deliberate attempt by especially one political party to borrow a term from the online age and the way that the internet is evolving, the enshittification of government is something that's been, again, a decades-long process, because then they can, again, message off of the failure that they have done in their jobs. They found a way to both be bad at their jobs and then market themselves as, wow, look at this job is really bad. I'm doing so good at making sure this bad job doesn't go anywhere. Again, I think it's just...
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's like, you take a hammer to a refrigerator and then you go, man, your refrigerator's broken. It seems like, we need to get rid of this refrigerator. And it's like, well, yeah, but I mean, it was perfectly fine until you took a hammer to it, Yeah. And that is really the way a lot of state and federal government is right now. As I keep reminding people, prior to the trifecta we had for 2 years, we had 40 years where Democrats never had full control of the state government. Mm-hmm. In that period, there was, I think, 20 years where the Republicans had trifectas. They spent a lot of concerted time and energy since the 1980s, every chance they got, chipping away, undermining all of our, every system that the state had. We're the only state right now that doesn't have a effective Consumer Protection Act because the Republicans undermined it and the Republican Supreme Court dismantled it. And so all this stuff that we should have, we don't have. And we get power for 2 years and we go about trying to rebuild it all, but it's going to take, it takes a lot longer to rebuild than it does to dismantle. That's the same thing with the federal government. The damage that Trump and Musk did in the first few months of this year, took them 3 months to do it. And it's going to take us a decade to get it back to where things, were.
Yeah, no, it really, really is. And I think, sorry for the cat cameo. They are running everywhere. The way that these, again, something I've always tried to communicate, these federal things become state things, and a lot of these state things become local things. We're looking at a $20+ million cut to MyDocs, which is, again, especially good for rural hospitals where they're getting doctors to come in communities they wouldn't otherwise try to get jobs in, to pay back student loans, but also give back to those communities and draw people into some of those lower populous areas, places people may not necessarily want to go for the first couple years of work. I think those programs are incredibly important, but we're also seeing an almost $75 million cut to revenue sharing, which I know is something you like to talk a little bit about in terms of how we fund our cities, our townships, and our counties, and the absolutely broken tax system that we have in Michigan, and this only making things worse in that sense.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, revenue sharing is already too low to begin with, for what it's worth. Without getting into a lot of really complicated detail, because of the way that Proposal A and Headley, which are 2 constitutional amendments that were passed in Michigan, one in the late 70s, one in the 90s, the way they interact with each other, they constantly push down against local property tax revenue. And this really got pronounced during the recession when the housing market collapsed. So basically the housing market collapses, and so what that means is the assessments all had to go down, which means everybody got big property tax cuts. But then because the constitutional amendments only allow for property tax values to recover at a maximum of 5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is higher.
Mm-hmm.
While property values started to fully recover, taxable value has just been this trickle. So we're at this point in time where there is this gulf between the assessed value of property and the amount that is able to be recovered by local governments. And, you can make a case that, that helps people a little bit because their property taxes are lower, whatever. But the moral of the story is that the state is not remitting back to the local governments enough to close that gap.
Yeah.
And so all of our local governments across the board are just like scrimping and scrounging right now to provide the basic services that they're required to provide. And that's, public safety, roads, pipes, right? Those sorts of things. And they're all choked. And, as you mentioned, our broken tax system, Michigan doesn't allow local communities to levy a sales tax, a use tax. They basically get millages and the option of passing an income tax of up to, I think, 1%, which is remarkably unpopular. And very few communities are able to actually get that done. So everybody kind of like is functioning at this severe deficit. And in the meantime, the cost of materials and labor have gone up by significant amounts over the last few years, and revenue is just creeping along. And so, we have a lot of small towns and, cities and townships in the state that are just, they're choking out right now. And so to cut revenue sharing in this moment is just like completely missing what is happening.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought up property taxes, because the Axe My Tax stuff has just been constant psychic damage in the back of my head, where I'm just like watching these folks, especially a lot of folks who are uninformed, a lot of folks who are being used by the Republican Party. But I mean, there's no understanding of the effects that this is going to have if it was somehow to pass for local cities, for local schools. I looked up Niles's budget just looking into it, because I was I should not have gotten into a Facebook conversation about it, but somebody I laugh reacted to a post that I saw because I'm like, it's silly, and they tagged me in the comments and was like, I thought you were fighting for working people, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about things that would fight for working people. Let's talk about actual policy changes and why this is a distraction from those things.
Yeah.
Her opinion ended up being we have too many people from Mexico jumping over our border, and that's why we don't have a housing crisis. So that was that's what we ended up getting to, and so I'm like, okay, cool. I've had enough internet for the week. But it was informative though, because I think again, the Republican Party is good at this, is finding a pet issue to address a real thing that ultimately only serves their goals, only serves their interests. Again, this is looking at Niles's budget. It's like 20% of their city budget. It's over 20% of their school budget. These are things that would have massive ramifications, especially compounding on top of all of the national cuts that are happening, all of the state cuts that were just passed, and again, cutting revenue sharing to these cities. I mean, again, what is your take on this property tax thing? I just think it's silly. I think ultimately it's like, when I've talked to folks, it just seems to be folks who have had their house paid off for a long time and are mad that they have to still contribute to their community. And again, that's me being a little bad faith about it, and I'll fully own that. But it really does, like, the people I've talked to that are like fully like axe my tax, is people who just don't believe in community. It seems like people who don't believe in the idea of like, oh, I should make sure that the kids that are in my school district get a good education and are fed well, and that actually does benefit me as well. And I just think we've had that breakdown so much in this country and in this community too.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I don't think the Axe My Tax thing has much of a chance, luckily. I mean, even a lot of Republicans I know understand that property taxes fund a significant amount of government services. But the thing is like, so if you can find it, there's this really interesting like case study that the London School of Economics did a couple of years ago that I read, where they basically were looking at different taxation models and what was the most equitable. And it was really interesting. It challenged a couple of notions that I had a little bit. But one of the things they really walked away with was that property taxes are by far the most equitable tax. And it makes sense if you think about it for a minute, because your poorest people don't own property. They tend to rent. And your wealthiest people tend to own a lot of property or very large properties. So when you tax property, you're actually like taxing wealth where it's at. In the most fair possible way, and the same thing, you're taxing businesses and corporations in a more fair way. And I mean, you got to make some exceptions for farmers who tend to own a lot of land but don't have a lot of money. But that aside, property taxes are super equitable.
Well, yeah, and one of the solutions they have for replacing that revenue is with sales tax increases, which is one of
Which is the least equitable.
Yeah, which is one of the least equitable forms of taxation we can do.
Yeah, because it's again, sales tax seems intuitively to people like it would be fair because it's like, oh, if people are spending more money, they're paying higher taxes, except for as from I'm sure reading about this stuff. Sales tax eats up a larger percentage of wages for poorer people, and wealthier people don't just keep spending into oblivion. They take their extra money and they just start putting it into investments like property. They invest their money after their needs are met. So sales tax just ends up being a really regressive tax that hurts working people and lower class people a lot more. And that's why we should have a graduated income tax system. Like we have a flat tax in Michigan, which is, again, everyone's like, oh, it's flat, it's equal for everybody. Yeah, except that's a higher percentage of wage for lower income people. And you should scale your income tax against wages.
Yeah, no, 100%. Again, it's those things that are intuitively true. Again, this is where I have famously called my opponent somebody who has the politics, someone who has the politics of an 8th grade libertarian, because it is 8th grade libertarian politics. It really is. And it's not meant to demean those who are being, convinced to go in that direction, who are being told by, again, if the only person or news that you're hearing are people telling you this authoritatively and with data that they're able to get from people like the Heritage Foundation and folks who have, doctor in front of their names, it's easy to fall into those traps. And again, it's the intuitiveness. It's, trying to teach, it's kind of like trying to teach people the difference between correlation and causation. It's like intuitively, when shark attack, increase in ice cream sales leads to shark attacks. It's like, well, no, it actually doesn't. It's just, it's summertime and more people are in the water and more people are buying ice cream. But, we see these all the time in, especially healthcare, especially in a lot of these more anti-vax circles where, they take these studies out of context and, you do these things. And again, it just is this disinformation vortex that forms. And it forms out of legitimate anger, when you're somebody who can't afford to go to the doctor, when you're someone who gets a $200 doctor's bill and you talk to a nurse, which, no offense to nurses, they're great, but you only talk to a nurse and your doctor for 3 minutes, you get bitter, you get angry, you get frustrated, and then you start turning to things that tell you that those things are in fact bad. Your feelings are justified. Those things are corrupt. And I think that, us having these broken institutions and us having these things that aren't working for people creates that pipeline and creates and feeds into that vortex that, again, folks are able to take advantage of, which is where we get some of these things that I think, to an outside looker is like, what is going on? Why are people talking about cutting property taxes, for heaven's sakes?
Yeah, well, it's so hard, I think, to get the regular people to understand that the only reason that they're pretending to care about healthcare or government or whatever is a justification to get large tax cuts through for themselves. I mean, that has been the Republican Party foundation since the Reagan era is tell working people, the middle class, whatever they need to hear to vote for us, and then cut taxes the minute we get power. And it's just a cycle that you watch every single time. They make all these big promises about what they're going to do and how they're going to improve all this stuff, and then the first thing they do is pass a massive tax cut, and then everything else kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah, no, I was kind of shocked at this town hall on Saturday. Everybody it was mostly a crowd of people that were on the Democrat lean side of things, and the crowd, I was really surprised to hear, very pro things like Medicare for all, not fully anti-gun. We want background checks, we want red flag laws, we want things like that. But I think a nuance there that I don't often see communicated in Democrat messaging nationally, not always seeing that statewide, but seeing things that the base are actually hungry for, and this is where I want to talk a little bit about abundance. This is something that I'm going to subject you to because you subjected me to this book. You were like, you should read it. You should read it. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be that guy who doesn't read it and has opinions on it. I'm going to listen to the whole thing. By the time I was done, I had almost as long of voice notes about the book that I did the length of the book. So I'm gonna condense those feelings down a little bit here. But I think what's interesting about the abundance thing, in the same way that what's interesting about a lot of Republican messaging, is there is a core truth that they're talking about, and I think that that's always really interesting and something that I don't want to throw babies out with the bathwater here. I think, looking at things like zoning reform, looking at things like reforming how we approach some of these systems and how we, again, fight for more efficiency. I think it was interesting that they talked a lot about how great China is at developing these things, but never really talked about the differences in our systems and how these things get done. And I think it's because a lot of the things that China does, they would not agree with and how to get there. And then those aren't things that I would necessarily agree with getting there. But I do think what was interesting about this book is I feel like it was written in a else world where the left doesn't exist, except for when they talk about the left as the degrowthers, which is, from my experience, a very small minority of people. That being said, I do want to talk a little bit first about those upsides. I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about, and I've seen you talk about a lot, is that zoning reform, is that housing need. What are some things that we can look at as a state representative, as people engaged with these issues, on those talking points, fighting those NIMBY tendencies, while also, again, I've seen people critical already of some of the things that St. Joe is doing, some of the improved projects that are happening, and people are already finding ways to, kind of like bite at the edges of it. What is your thought? And I know a lot of your thoughts on this, but go ahead and give folks your thoughts a little bit on housing, how we can make housing better, more affordable, and how we can start to address some of those zoning concerns that we have.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that really everyone has to understand is, like, we are in a severe housing crisis right now. To the point where when I was on the housing committee last year in Lansing, MISHDA, our state housing board, told us that it has gotten so bad that we just need to say yes to housing broadly. And the reason for that, and I think this is where people get like a little hung up, is that the housing market functions best when there is like a churn in the market, right? Because housing is like kind of this fundamental thing. Everybody needs a place to live. You can't just really forego housing and have it be okay. And so when there's a constraint on housing, it causes what we're seeing right now, which is like prices and rents to just balloon out of control. Like, the only reason that BlackRock is buying up housing is because we've turned it into a commodity. Like, we've made it valuable to invest in housing long term by not building any housing. And like, if you listen to any of BlackRock's investor calls, anytime a state or a community like restricts zoning, they're like, heck yeah, we love this. And that tells you all you need to know about these restrictions. But basically what's happening is, like, if you think about the class pyramid, right? The wealthiest people can buy whatever they want, wherever they want it. There's no real object to it, right? So they can come to, St. Joe or Dowagiac, wherever, and they can just be like, I'm going to buy a house. And if what they want isn't there, they'll just buy whatever's closest to it and tear it down and build something else, because they can do that. But what that does is it takes that next tier of property off the market. So like the upper middle class tier. So then the upper middle class people go, well, I can't find what I want, so I guess I'll go down a tier, cash buy, and I'll fixer upper, whatever. So then the middle class housing starts to disappear, and that forces your middle class down a tier, and eventually you get to that working class tier where there is nothing, and those people get pushed out and they get squeezed because they have to take whatever they can take. And that's when you start seeing rents start creeping up like crazy, because landlords start to see, well, I'm getting 100 applicants for 20 units, so I guess I can raise the rent until my applicant number drops, right? And so it's a weird thing, because it is like raw supply and demand. Like, it is just like the most basic supply and demand thing. So that kind of established. The issue is that back in the 1970s, and abundance, really, this is, I think, one of the parts of the abundance stuff that I think really nails it, is back in the 70s or so, a lot of communities put all of these hyper restrictive zoning laws into place. And the only reason they did it, it's very clear, is that they were trying to keep Black people and poor people out of their communities. And the easiest way to do that was to say no apartments, no duplexes, no multifamily. We're only going to allow big single family homes.
Yeah, with very
Because only
specific parking requirements, very specific height requirements. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, as much as you can do to lock out poor people from living in your community and make it so that only middle class and above can buy. And so that went into effect. It had the desired result. It kept brown people, Black people, and working class people out of these communities. But now it's having this side effect of starting to push out the people who had originally benefited, who are now retired and trying to afford their housing. And so if you get rid of these restrictive zoning laws and you let housing get built, you kind of let the supply and demand take place, right? Like, yeah, a developer is going to come in and they're going to say, well, I can put in some condos here. Why? Because there's a pent up demand for those condos, and there's a bunch of people living in not condos who would love to live in a condo, or like same thing with apartments, right? Like they're going to build to demand, and I know there's a belief that there is no such thing as like meeting demand, but there genuinely is. I mean, you can see what's happening in like Austin and Minneapolis right now as really good examples, like red state, blue state, and you're seeing this experiment play out where once they got zoning out of the way, development started flooding in, and now rents have started to flatline. And in the case of both of them, they're actually starting to decrease now, because what happens is landlords start losing their competitive edge. And so then if you own an old apartment complex, right, where it's like not the best quality, you're competing against brand new high quality apartments. So you have to drop your rents to draw people in. And then on the, what ends up happening is people start entering this market churn where people move into like small houses to start families, opening up an apartment for somebody else, or they move out of the small house, and right. And so you start this churn that opens up housing for different market segments, but that can only happen if you kind of like pull back on the reins and let things go. And I think you're seeing this in St. Joe with this project right now, right? Is that they came and they were like, we're going to do like 60 apartments, 120% area median income or less, and we're going to do 30 condos. And so a bunch of people come and they're like, well, we need more workforce housing. Yes, we do, 100%. But in order for us to have that workforce housing, we also need these apartments. We also need these condos, because we got to get people off of their workforce housing and into the house they want. Yeah. And I think too, like, it's hard to build workforce housing. But it's always been that way. And what ends up actually being your workforce housing is your older housing stock, right? Like the house I live in right now is 30 years old when I bought it. Like I couldn't afford a brand new house as a starter home. I bought a 30-year-old house. And when I, maybe one day can afford to move out of this house, I will probably be selling it to a, young family who is looking for a 40-year-old house. And, they'll fix it up a little bit, like we had to fix it up a little bit. But like, that is how you enter the housing market. And this idea that you can build a brand new house that's going to be 150,000, it's impossible. So like the way to do it is to build the somewhat more desirable housing that pushes people out of the older housing stock that they're in. So it's a complicated system. And I think the problem is, and I had somebody say this to me, it sounds like Reaganomics for housing, but it genuinely is just a supply and demand problem. And one of the things I've been kind of like complaining about at the state level is that the state has a hard time incentivizing housing being built, because all we can really do is throw money at it. And the problem with throwing money at it is we're like subsidizing mortgages and loans and that sort of stuff, which means that we're actually like pumping demand, because we're giving people more buying power. And if we don't increase the supply while we're pumping demand, all we're actually doing is forcing prices up. So it's like we're killing ourselves on two ends here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that I 100% agree with. And again, where a lot of my criticisms lie of that abundance approach is, again, the way it ignores that the left has been talking about urban development for a long, long time. That's a lot of folks way into the left, in fact, is, urban revitalization, walkable neighborhoods, mixed zoning, things, public transit, things that, people have been fighting for and arguing for and begging for years and years and years. And I think, again, we see, hopefully the Democratic Party moving in the direction of looking towards some of these things. But I think, the arguments for, especially I think mixed zoning, especially some of these community building projects. I think a lot of the things that we're
Yeah.
facing right now are being born out of that atomization that people are feeling from their communities, are being born out of that separation. We don't have community centers anymore. We don't have, town
Third
halls and
spaces.
local downtowns and local pubs and things like that folks congregate in. And I think, especially post pandemic, those are things that we have to very intentionally rebuild so that we can build a population who understands that, oh, my taxes pay for my neighbor's kid, and that actually is good for me. And, oh, the roads that we all share should be paved decently, and maybe we shouldn't sacrifice all human need for the road. Things like that. I think, again, helping people remember that human community is good and that they're not just residents of a nameless entity, they're residents of a town of people that they are connected to. I think that's just something
Yeah,
that's been so lost.
I think it has too. I mean, we've lost like third spaces in general.
Yeah.
There's so few, especially that are like free or low cost. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like we're of like approximately the same generation. Like we grew up like hanging out in malls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was free to go hang out in the mall. You might spend some money, but you didn't have to. But
Yeah.
you could meet up with your friends in a space that was like free of like parental oversight to a degree, and like
Mm-hmm.
that was an important growing process, I think, for a lot of us. If you're a kid, like, I mean, one, if your parents let you walk outside the house, the cops get called on them immediately. So there's that. But it's just like, where do you go? Where are you
Yeah.
supposed to hang out with your friends? Like, there's just those spaces have evaporated. I completely agree. It's a huge problem. But and I also, to speak to, I think part of the thing that the like Klein and Thompson are talking about with the left is really focused on a kind of leftism that
Mm-hmm.
mostly exists in like California and New York.
Yeah.
And I don't think they do a good enough job specifying that in the book. Like you kind of have to like read the expanded universe to get that. But what they're really kind of, I think, talking to is like the San Francisco and Los Angeles brand of leftism that
Mm-hmm.
is like killing housing projects left and right and like claiming that it's somehow a win for the working class and the environment when it's
Mm-hmm.
the exact opposite. Because I mean, I agree, right? Like
Yeah.
I know a lot of like very progressive people in Michigan that are like literally leading the charge on zoning reform and tax reform and that sort of stuff. And it's yeah, lumping everybody together a little too much isn't necessarily productive.
Yeah. No, and that's absolutely fair. And I think, for me, I think, we need strong beliefs. We need strong convictions. And I think that's something that we learned from 2024, being able to be strong on some of these issues. That's something people should be learning from Zoran Mamdani's campaign, where you don't have to compromise, you don't have to shirk away from the things that you believe in, as long as you're somebody who can communicate decently on why you believe it. And I think, the Democratic Party, I think, for a lot of years has been very afraid to, and I think there's a lot of reasons for this. I think nationally there's some serious concerns about donors. There's some serious concerns about, what is allowed, frankly, in that, in that space. But I think also, I don't know, there's something we're seeing kind of tear away right now is we always have to take the high road. We always have to be the like calm, reasoned person. I think, Gavin Newsom, for all of the ills that I, see towards him, and working people should be very skeptical of him, and LGBTQ people should especially be very skeptical of him. What is working is the attempt to, again, do what Tim Walz did, which is call them weird, make fun of them,
Yes,
like call out the strangeness, call
the
Brad
fact that
gender obsessed, all of these things that work.
the fact that they tamped down on Tim Walz on that has always just been astounding to me. Like when he came out and was just like, these people are weird and they're obsessed with weird things. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my God, somebody's finally saying it.
Yeah.
Like, thank God. And then they were like, oh no, you shouldn't say that anymore.
Yeah,
And then,
that national convention was like when they didn't have the Palestinian representative speak, when they didn't have the Johns, I think it was not Johns, the two representatives who they cut from the last day, I forget their names. But when they, and then again, the messaging shift from, we're going to keep pushing forward, we're going to keep doing a better future, these guys are so weird, we're going to keep doing better things too, we're going to have the most lethal fighting force in the world, and Tim Walz is just going to be stuffed in a closet somewhere. I still
yeah,
believe that he should have been on every sports podcast known to man. And the idea
yeah.
that he
And
wasn't talking football for a whole month on sports podcasts is a crime against the state of
I know.
America. Like, frankly, it is
And,
a crime against our nation that wasn't a strategy
and
that they were
it's,
employing.
instead they're trying to have him like work on cars awkwardly and like shoot guns. And it's like, God, I
Yeah.
just, can we not? Yeah.
Just put
But like, I
on
mean,
Rich Eisen and talk about, like leading in a locker room, and
yeah,
people would eat that stuff up. They would love it.
no, put that man on Joe Rogan. Like,
Yeah,
let him go talk to Joe Rogan. I mean,
absolutely.
fine. And that's what I think too is like because one of my big takeaways, especially from like Mom Dami's success, is the value of authenticity.
Yeah,
Like he is just like who he is. He communicates in a way that you can tell is like sincere. And
yeah,
so when
and
they try
fun
to
for
attack
him.
him, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's fun. It's interesting how like when you're just being like yourself and honest, it can be enjoyable instead of
Mhm.
painful. Um, it and it like it comes across, and it also makes all the attacks just like fall against him because
Mhm.
he's not being fake. So when they attack him, he's like, yeah, what of it? And like that's something that you don't get to do when you're like being manufactured and fake because they start attacking you for being a hypocrite and for like being fake, and it's hard for you to defend that because it's like, well, yeah, being totally fake right now. you know and I hope the party's learning from that because I think that's one of Schumer's weaknesses, and I think that's one of the weaknesses we see in a lot of our leadership is that it's this like very like polished and manufactured thing, and when it gets to people they're like, no, no,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
I know. Yeah, I mean that's how you get AOC Trump voters, people who vote for both somehow. Because there's an authenticity to both of their deliveries that wasn't there, and that again was there in the early days of the campaign. I felt, but not again post convention. I feel like it was really just the momentum taken out of the room.
I do too. Yeah, everything just like flatlined.
Yeah. So that being said, we're looking at an interesting 2026 and a
Mm.
certainly interesting 2028. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Last little question here. Joey Andrews, what is your prediction for 2028? Who's our candidate? Uh, what do you think? What are you feeling right now?
Boy,
And I'll be honest. I'm posing this question to you. I fully don't have an answer to it either. So I will be thinking furiously here as well. But who looks good to you for 2028? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone wants to know. Uh,
yeah,
yeah. Who
I,
should we be ranting for?
it's I think it's so hard right now. Like, I mean, like you said, like I like what Newsom is doing. I don't know if like I want Newsom the president,
Yeah.
but I think what he's doing is like setting a cool standard. I really don't think we should be doing like Harris Part Two. I
Yeah.
really feel like we should have learned our lesson there. Um, Part of me thinks that the person that it's going to be is probably not somebody who's in the conversation right now.
Mm,
Like, I have thought for a long time that like Raphael Warnock would be like an incredible standard bearer for the party if we could overcome like the whole having to vacate a Georgia Senate seat
I was thinking
thing.
John also for the same reason too. I'm like, oh, he'd be interesting to see.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Wait,
George is yeah.
the thing I like about Warnock, and like again, this is probably just like me wishing for something that's going to be hard to have happen, but like you have somebody that is like lifelong like talked about the same sets of issues and like genuinely believes in what he's saying, is able to connect with black voters in a way that we have been like seriously losing as a party.
Yeah.
And I think like we need somebody like that who can like bring the coalition back together, like bring workers back into the party, like bring like Latino and black people back into the party in a way that we haven't been able to do since the Obama coalition kind of started to
Mm,
fall apart. Um, and I don't have a lot of faith in a lot of the like front runners right now to be
yeah.
able to pull that off. Um,
Yeah, I wake up in fear of some of these people who are currently the front runners getting there because I just don't think any of them have the sauce, right? I mean, again, JD Vance is a much easier candidate. I'm assuming that's who it's going to be.
yeah,
Hopefully
probably.
not Trump a third term. Knock on wood. Um, but I mean, like AOC, I hope she runs for Senate. I really do.
Same, same.
I think that's the move. She's been
Yep,
so successfully good at her job, but also so successfully flanderized to anybody who opposes her that I
yep.
think she needs a little bit more time to shed that 2016 era, Gamergate era, like woke girl that we don't respect because she's a woman thing that the Republicans branded pretty effectively.
Yes, they
Um,
did.
and it's not her fault in any way. But again, I would in fact more so blame the party that didn't really back the squad at the time. Um, yeah, no, I mean Andy Bashir I think is a VP candidate at best. Gavin
Yeah,
Newsom is, I mean,
VP again. I could
uh,
see him being a good VP candidate. Like
yeah,
he can go and bulldog him.
yeah.
I'll take him a bulldog.
California is always tough for the main
Yeah.
guy, and Pete, I mean, needs to do at least one more actual successful public service job before he can. I'm
And,
shocked he's not running for something in 2026. Honestly, that was really, I think,
and
disappointing seeing that.
there's a lot of things think Pete does really well. Like, I think he has that kind of like Obama-esque quality where like he is able to cut through as a communicator, but I mean, every poll that comes out, 0%
Yeah.
with black voters, like he has got to figure out how to rebuild
Yeah.
himself with the black community before I think he's a viable candidate.
And especially someone like him is good at rebuilding himself, frankly. He's got the,
Yeah.
brain brokenness to do so.
I like Pritzker, I don't know if like Illinois governor has the ability to like make it to the big stage, but like Pritzker does a lot of those things where he's a fighter, like he's got that like can't be bought thing that Trump has going for him, except uses his powers for good instead of evil. So I mean, I could see that taken off, but I just think anybody who was like coded in like the politics of the Trump era and like COVID and all that stuff, I feel like by 2028 that stuff is going to just be like everyone's going to want to move past it. I don't know.
Yeah, in my heart of hearts, I hold a little bit of love for my man Beto. He needs to move out of Texas, frankly. I don't know how my man is like, I'm going to be the most anti-gun human being on the planet and then try to win in Texas. And he almost did, like he did decent against Cruz. But there is something about his quality that I do appreciate, like a sincereness, because it is so politically ineffective, his messaging. But there is sincerity there I love.
I just feel like if he wouldn't have run for president in 2020, he could have ran for Senate again in Texas without having like completely tainted himself by taking the positions he had to in that primary. And he might like have won a Texas race, and then he'd be like front runner, right? Like everybody'd be like, oh man, this guy could win Texas.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, so I kind of agree. I'm hoping someone has in 2006 convention speech that makes everybody think they should be president. Because frankly, I think we're kind of, got a limited roster here.
Yeah, I think the COVID era in particular has just like, and what, the positions that people were sort of like forced to take in some ways or willingly took in other ways. I just think it's going to make it hard for them to like run in a 2028 environment, because they're going to run into that problem again where people are going to be like, well, in 2021, you said this, and this. Why isn't that true today? Right? The same stuff Harris had a problem with. They're like, well, you said all this stuff 4 years ago.
Yeah, and frankly, I don't think those things would have been as difficult to keep doing if she was consistent. I think, again, Trump is able to talk about, people's penis sizes and, tariffs that the Republicans have been historically against for the entire time. But because he sticks to his guns, doesn't back down, and communicates well, to his base at least, it works.
The reality is the only politician that Trump ever struggled against was the one who ran like the most authentically, right? Like Biden has been Biden for 50 years. Trump couldn't get Biden on stage during the 2020 election and like make him slip up, because Biden was just like, yeah, this has always been my position, go to hell. And Hillary and Harris both struggled with that against Trump, where he was able to like dissect them basically and be like, well, you said this, but now you said this, like you're just another fake politician. And once he does that to somebody, they fall apart in the eyes of the public. And so you need somebody that, even though Trump is, not going to be there, hopefully, in 28, you need somebody who can actually like run authentically, I think. And that is,
And I think that bold vision for the future, I think, the base is hungry for these actual solutions that we've been talking about for decades. It's a reconstruction too that needs to happen, and we need someone who's got the fortitude to actually deliver reconstruction too. Well, with that all being said, Joey, thank you so much for coming on.
This was fun.
Shop with us. Any last thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with as we kind of close down?
No, I hope anybody listening gets involved, stays involved. I mean, I've said a million times over, right? Like every year we're like, this is the most important election of your life. But I mean, I hope after last year you understand that we meant it. Like literally every election is just the most important election of your life. And I hope everybody, knows that now and sees we've got very critical elections on the horizon, and they got to stay involved.
Yeah. The goal is, if we can start turning that temperature down long term, maybe an election 10 years from now won't be the most important election of our lifetime. And that would be such a gift, frankly. Such a gift to us all. Thank you so much to Joey for joining us for this podcast. And thank you for checking this out. We are, again, excited to be ramping up this part of our online production. We're hoping to continue to have some really exciting guests. We have a few more lined up for the coming weeks. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to follow our pages. Check in on our website. And if you're interested in giving a donation to the Maverick for Michigan campaign, you can do so at maverickformichigan.com. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and for your support to our campaign. We truly would not be able to do this without you. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for your support, for sharing these posts, for liking them, and for talking to us at all the events that we see folks at. Again, together, we can bring the 37th House District's voice back to Lansing.